Early morning on January 22, 1959, about 81 miners living in 3 districts of the Wyoming Valley woke up and prepared for a normal day of work. At the Knox mine in the town of Pittston, Frank Olowski, 41 years old, had spent most of his life working underground. His morning usually started with a cup of coffee and a newspaper before heading to work. Normally, Frank rarely ate breakfast, but that day, he suddenly told his wife that he felt hungry, so she prepared for him -1 cups and also carefully put a few sandwiches into his lunchbox for him to take along. Elsewhere, Samuel Atari was also preparing for work. Every morning, he and his wife took the same bus because their workplaces were on the same route. When the bus reached the garment factory, Samuel said goodbye to his wife and continued his journey to the coal mine, while his wife also got off the bus to start her shift. Neither of the two knew that it would be the last time they would see each other. At the same time, a surveyor named Joe Stella had arrived at the Knox mine to conduct a routine inspection. It had been 1 or 2 weeks since the last time he checked the tunnel system, stretching for kilometers underground. He went down to an area called River Slope, where many other mining crews were also working. After inspecting an area and confirming everything was normal, he turned to head to the next point just as he was walking through another corridor in the maze of tunnels when he suddenly heard screams ringing out from behind, demanding everyone to leave the mine immediately. Looking back, Joe saw Samuel along with many other workers running toward him in a panic. No one had time to explain what was happening. They only knew they had to escape as quickly as possible. Joe, along with some others, immediately gathered the remaining workers, and they all headed toward the main shaft to find a way to the surface. Not long after, they realized there was something unusual under their feet. It was water. At first, it was just a thin layer of water under their feet, but very quickly, the water level rose to a level that could be clearly seen with the naked eye. This mine was a giant maze, consisting of countless tunnels lying as deep as about 300 meters underground. In particular, this river slope area was dug right beneath the bed of the Susquehanna River. Therefore, engineers always had to be especially careful not to mine too close to the river bed. According to safety standards, the layer of rock separating the tunnel ceiling and the river bed had to be at least 11 meters thick. But on that day, a mining crew skipped the exploratory drilling step to determine the thickness of the rock layer above and dug too close to the river bed without knowing that only a very thin layer of rock remained to separate billions of liters of water from the entire tunnel system below. Just like that, the disaster happened. In a flash, the tunnel ceiling suddenly collapsed, causing millions of liters of water from the Susquehanna River to pour into the mine with terrible force. At that very moment, this river was also experiencing one of the biggest floods in many years. Due to the torrential rains beforehand, on the river surface right above the 23-meter wide hole, the water began to swirl violently, forming a giant whirlpool. Ice floes, tree trunks, and all kinds of debris floating in the flood were all sucked into the ground as if the entire river was being swallowed. Down below, the escape quickly turned into a fight for survival. The water level soon rose to their waists and continued to rise incessantly. The freezing water carried mud and rocks, rushing through the tunnels at a terrifying speed. -1 miners were trapped for 5 hours amidst the ice-cold water. Finally, they were lucky enough to discover an air shaft upstream and had to climb hundreds of meters up the vertical shaft to be able to escape to the surface. In another area, 7 hours after the water began to flood the mine, rescue forces found 26 more workers wading through the flooded tunnels and managed to bring them out safely. As more and more survivors gathered outside the mine entrance, a heartbreaking truth gradually emerged. 12 miners were still missing, and if they were alive, it was almost certain that they were trapped somewhere in the maze of tunnels now submerged underwater. At the same time, at least 28 others had also been taken to nearby hospitals to be treated for various injuries. Around 3:15 p.m. that day, when the shift ended, Samuel's wife stood waiting for the bus as she did every day. Normally, as soon as she stepped onto the bus, she would see her husband smiling, sitting in his usual seat, but today he was not there. At first, she was not too worried, because sometimes Samuel was still given a ride home by colleagues in their private cars. But just a few minutes later, a woman on the bus turned to ask her if she had heard the news about the accident at the Knox mine. That news left her stunned. Even so, she still tried to reassure herself because Samuel was an electrician, so he did not work deep underground. It was very possible that he had already returned home, but when she got home, the house was completely empty after our past, and her husband still did not appear. Finally, she had to rush to the Knox mine to encounter a sea of people gathering in a tense and chaotic atmosphere. Among the crowd, she met some miners who had just escaped. Their clothes were soaked, their faces pale from exhaustion after the horrific escape. They reassured her that Samuel had escaped. According to these people, Samuel had stayed behind in a tunnel section to direct those running behind him toward the exit, while also trying to keep everyone calm during the chaos. While she still could not fully understand everything that was happening outside the mine, an emergency operation to stop the water from continuing to flood the underground had been deployed. To do that, they were forced to plug the 9 holes at the bottom of the river. However, accessing them from inside the mine was completely impossible. Because everything was now submerged, the only way was to handle it from right on the river surface. The company decided to take advantage of the very giant whirlpool that was sucking the entire river into the ground. They continuously dumped coal cars, train cars, hundreds of bales of straw, along with piles of scrap wood into the swirling water, with the hope that this huge amount of material would help plug the hole until nightfall. More than 30 coal cars, along with hundreds of bales of straw, were thrown into the vortex, but its suction force still almost did not diminish at all. This effort continued throughout the night and extended into the next day. The Knox mine was connected to many different mines throughout the Wyoming Valley, so 11 coal mines were forced to close indefinitely, causing about 10,000 miners to lose their jobs overnight. After that, anyone who could help joined the campaign to plug the hole at the bottom of the river. By noon, the Lehigh Valley Railroad Company a temporary road along the railway line so that trucks could access the whirlpool located about 20 meters from the flooded riverbank. By the end of that day, there were 38 more coal cars, 200 mine carts, dozens of trucks carrying large rocks, along with utility poles, railway ties, and all kinds of other bulky materials, were all dumped into the river one after another. In a press conference held at that time, a representative of the mining company stated that they believed the amount of water flowing had been reduced by about 30 to 35%. They also expressed hope that the 12 missing workers had found high ground to take shelter. But as time went on, the true picture of this disaster became increasingly bleak. A miner who wished to remain anonymous told that he had personally seen 3 bodies being swirled by the water inside the tunnels. The water level data at nearby mine shafts made that fragile hope almost vanish. At shaft number 14 of the Pennsylvania, a few hundred meters south of the Knox mine, the water had risen to a depth of 99 meters, and at the closer Hoyt shaft, the water level had reached 152 meters. Those numbers showed that the entire Knox mine system had been almost completely submerged, meaning that the survival chances of those still trapped were almost zero. On January 25th, a harsh article appeared in the local newspaper. It condemned the way the mining company had treated the families of the missing workers. 2 days had passed since the disaster occurred, but the wives could hardly get any sleep. They were not only exhausted from worrying, but also extremely outraged at the indifference of the company's management. All those women gathered at one location to wait together for news about their husbands. Company officials knew exactly where they were, but no one came to meet them, nor did anyone proactively inform them that their husbands were on the list of missing persons. Instead, the list of 12 missing workers was published all over the newspapers and broadcast on the radio. Until that moment, the only way for families to know their loved ones might be victims of the disaster was when they never returned home after work. One wife said that her house was only a 10-minute walk from the mine. Her husband always had a habit of coming home after his shift, drinking a beer, and taking a shower. But on the day the accident happened, returned home after work, the house was completely empty. The beer bottle was still intact in the refrigerator, never opened. Only when she heard people whispering to each other about the flooding did she silently realize what had happened. At the end of that day, the Knox Mining Company held another press conference after 3 consecutive days of dumping everything possible into the river from coal cars, mine carts, boulders to utility poles and wood. They finally managed to plug the hole at the bottom of the river. However, along with that good news came an announcement that caused everyone who was hoping to almost collapse. The management admitted that they no longer believed any of the 12 missing workers were still alive. The mine manager even declared to the press that inside the mine tunnel system, there did not exist any location higher than the water level for those trapped to take shelter. Once again, the victims' relatives had to learn the bad news through reporters instead of from the company. By noon on January 26, high-capacity pumps had been transported to the scene and were preparing to go into operation. But just then, an unexpected incident occurred. News of the accident had spread throughout the area, attracting thousands of people from all the surrounding towns and even from other states to monitor the situation. The number of vehicles pouring in was so large that the parking lot was quickly overloaded. Many people had to abandon their cars in the middle of the road, causing serious congestion and hindering the transport of rescue equipment to the scene. It took more than 100 police officers to clear the traffic, paving the way for Army engineers and Navy experts to reach the area to begin the water pumping operation. Of course, every minute and every second at that time was extremely precious, because if the 12 missing people were still alive, they'd been trapped underground for 4 days already. However, later on, people realized that delay no longer meant much. The pumps operated continuously day and night for the next 4 days, but the water level inside the mine only dropped by about more than 1 meter. By January 29th, even more powerful pumps had been brought to the scene. They were capable of sucking up more than 500,000 liters of water per minute. But immediately after that, experts announced a figure that made everyone completely desperate. It was estimated that more than 150 billion liters of river water had flooded into the Knox mine system. The Secretary of Mines of Pennsylvania said it would probably take at least 3 weeks, or even longer, for rescue forces to reach the area where the missing people were likely trapped. According to his calculations, just lowering the water level by another 30 meters would take another 12 weeks. That information almost completely extinguished the last glimmer of hope that the 12 miners could still be alive underground. Even so, the pumping operation continued, but by February 10th, the campaign encountered another major obstacle when water from the Susquehanna River began to leak back into the tunnel system. By that time, almost everyone had accepted the heartbreaking truth that the 12 missing workers no longer had a chance of survival. The most tragic thing was that despite the relentless efforts to drain the mine, the bodies of the 12 workers were never found. They remained among those unfortunate victims. After the disaster, a large-scale investigation was conducted. The investigation concluded that the cause of the mine flooding stemmed entirely from the illegal mining activities of the Knox Company. The management had directed workers to dig too close to the riverbed to extract more coal, ignoring safety standards. That very decision caused the rock layer above to no longer be able to bear the load, leading to the ceiling collapsing and billions of liters of water from the Susquehanna River poured down into the entire tunnel system. After the investigation, 10 officials of this company were indicted for their role in the disaster, and 6 of them had to serve prison sentences. But the pain of the victims' families did not stop there. The wives of the 12 deceased workers had to wait for more than 4 years to receive the death benefits that they should have been entitled to. Immediately after the accident, coal mining still exists in some places in the Wyoming Valley. However, the memory of the Knox mine disaster remains a wound that has never healed in the hearts of the local people, even until now. Many residents in the area still remain cautious and even oppose new energy development projects because they are always haunted by the painful lesson that the 1959 disaster left behind.